Here with me now is Anna Prusa, associate at the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute. What we're seeing here is all sides shifting blame, pointing fingers. The government is blaming the mining company. The mining company is saying, hey, we've done everything to the letter in terms of regulation and safety. Who is to blame here?
I think in some ways trying to pinpoint blame in this particular accident, tragic as it is, misses the greater point, which is that this is a systemic failure. It's a failure of a bunch of different entities working together to create the conditions in which something like this can happen. And if that is not addressed, then I think in 2, 3, 4 years, we will see this happen all over again.
This has happened before.
It has.
This is now the largest disaster of its kind, with this count of injured and missing and dead still growing. How do they prevent something like this from happening again? You mentioned systemic failure. What's the first step?
I think the first step is taking a look at the regulatory framework in place in Brazil right now. So industry doesn't like it because it's very bureaucratic. It's hard to get anything done. Environmentalists don't like it because they say, yes, there's all this bureaucracy, but it's not actually fixing the problem. It's not actually making our environment safer. So it's really figuring out, how do you make the system safer and yet also easier to do business? And it can be done. It's not impossible. It just requires getting everyone at the table and looking at this seriously.
Environmentally, what kind of damage are we looking at? What are the short-term and the long-term effects here?
So in the short run, obviously, there's been a lot of this mud. There's some debate over whether or not it's toxic. We do know that in 2015, the mining disaster that you referred to in Mariana, it only killed 19 people, but the ore was found to be toxic. There were heavy metals. It ended up killing thousands of fish, which led to thousands of deaths, of the animals that eat the fish. And so there were all these kind of domino effects, right? It's uncertain how much of that we'll see here, but I think at the very least, certainly the region is going to be hugely affected.
What does this do for the mining industry? Is it at a standstill? At the moment there?
I think Vale itself, the company that was responsible for this mine and was also responsible for the Mariana disaster, it was one of its joint ventures, certainly is going to face a lot of, I think, attention and probably a lot of pressure to do something in the aftermath of this. The mining sector in general in Brazil, it does have a fair amount of power. It's responsible for about 3.5% of GDP over the last 5 years on average, and they're very influential in Congress. So on the one hand, I think, this disaster could create momentum to actually see these conversations happening that need to happen. But at the same time, I think there are some fears that, in a couple weeks, a couple months, when people aren't paying attention anymore, maybe at the end of the day, not enough will actually happen.
And that being said, on a scale to 1 to 10, how would you rate Brazil's response to environmental disasters, especially this one?
Well, I think the response is always good in the immediate aftermath, right? They get the first responders there. Brazil's military is very professional. We've seen people from all over the world. We saw the Israeli Defense Force, they're sending in their rescue team. So in terms of the search and rescue, I think there is a good response. It's the longer term steps. It's how do you prevent this from happening again? And I think that is where Brazil and other countries, to be honest, have some work to do.
Anna Prusa, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it.